Our final keynote speaker of the morning, and I'm so pleased we're so on time. Good job, everybody. So wonderful. Is Dr. Raul Lopez, and he's the interim director of the Texas A&M Institute of Renewable.
Full-time director.
Oh, I'm sorry. Full-time director. Pardon me. The Texas A&M Institute of Renewable Natural Resources and the Texas Water Resources Institute. Dr. Lopez is also a professor in the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries Sciences at Texas A&M, and he has over 20 years of experience in natural resource and land management with academia, federal and private industry. As a faculty member at A&M, he has authored over 100 journal articles and book chapters and has chaired over 60 graduate students. He has served as a special assistant to the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense Installation and Environment, that's a mouthful, and continues to work with the Department of Defense on various national and local natural resource and environmental issues. His research focuses on endangered and fragmented wildlife populations, nuisance populations in urban settings, and the sustainability of military lands. Dr. Lopez earned his BS in forestry from Stephen F. Austin State University and both a master's and PhD in wildlife and fisheries sciences from Texas A&M University. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Raul Lopez.
Yeah, let's see if I can figure this out.
Yeah.
It's down at the bottom.
There it is. No, Roel, that one.
Howdy.
There.
It's a pleasure to be here. Two quick notes. The first is it's great following Mary Pope's comments talking about no money in the IRS. So painting that dismal picture, thank you, Mary Pope, is great because what that does for me is it can only go up from here. So that's the first. And then for Tim, I apologize for the whoop earlier. It's something that's ingrained in me. This is a true story. A couple of months ago, I was at church, kind of dazing off. During the sermon, he talked about Johnny Manziel and Texas A&M and kind of woke up, whoop! Just during the sermon, and of course, that wasn't received too well. So the charge that was given to me this morning is to talk about why diversity matters from a land conservation perspective. And what I'd like to do is two things. Figure out how this works. The first is where we are, kind of provide a real quick snapshot in terms of where we are from a diversity perspective in the state and how that fits into land conservation, and more specifically with land trusts, kind of what you do with regards to this. The second is, in reviewing that, kind of looking at how do we move forward. I think Mary Pope talked about engagement. Great word, because that's Aggie professor. Might as well give me that pencil, and I'll just kind of walk around, Todd. All right, and so the second piece of it will be how to engage, okay? We've heard a lot about Texas, big state, 171 million acres, primarily privately owned. These lands provide habitats for wildlife, it provides recreational opportunities, it provides lands for air and water for our citizens, it provides habitats for wildlife, and so forth. And in addition, we've got 25 million people that depend on these natural resources. Like the state's natural resources, very diverse. And when you think of diversity, it has many dimensions. Primary characteristics might be something like gender or age, something you can see when you meet someone. Secondary characteristics are things you typically can't see. A person's level of education, their income, religious beliefs. And when you look at Texas from a human demographic perspective, it's been mentioned we've got 25 million people, evenly split between males and females. When you look at ethnicity, predominantly white and Hispanic comprises the bulk of those 25 million people. Interestingly, when you look at that same statistic, but you look at it from a poverty level perspective, that shifts to include primarily Hispanic and African American. So the takeaway here is, there are some challenges when it comes to economic disadvantage for certain groups. You look at age, again, I'm going to go through a couple of slides comparing Hispanics and whites. In general, the Hispanic population is much younger compared to the white population, a lot older. You look at education, there's differences by ethnicity. In general, Hispanics and African Americans have a lower level of educational attainment compared to their counterparts, Asians and whites. And the reason I give all of this is because these demographics pose pretty significant natural resource challenges. It was alluded to by, I think, Lori, that in the next 30, 40 years, we're going to go from 25 million people to, in this case, 32 million. And the largest growth is going to be realized within the Hispanic community. And so, talking about the relevancy of what we do as land conservationists, the relevancy of what you do as a land trust, tied to these socioeconomic issues, education, age, poverty, and last but not least, participation in conservation. Participation equals conservation. So in looking at two primary characteristics, did it drop again, Todd? Oh. Specifically gender and ethnicity. And I'm going to go through these pretty quick because the trends is pretty obvious. You look at, for example, the number of kids nationally that have looked at a natural resource related career. For the first time, we actually have more females, and so now we're beginning to see a shift in the ranks, in the classrooms and so forth. Participation. So participation is shifting, in this case for gender. When you look at ethnicity, there's been some gains for certain groups, but overall, participation's primarily for the white population. Looking at workforce, in this case, Fish and Wildlife Service nationally, folks that have a natural resource type of title, predominantly male compared to female. Looking at ethnicity, same thing. Predominantly, the higher level of participation is for the white population. And lastly, I tried to actually get TWA data and got it, but it was a little too late for the presentation. But I'm going to use the Wildlife Society national data. It's participation in an NGO, or it could be a land trust. I mean, these graphs could apply to a lot of different organizations, conservation organizations. Predominantly male, and again, very low participation for some of the other groups. The takeaway I want to leave with you, when you look at that data, I look at it as a missed opportunity. We've got this segment of the population that's growing. Texas is a population that's very diverse, but yet there's differences in the level of participation. How can we change that? Because if you believe this idea of participation equals conservation, then again, with an environment with limited resources and so forth, broadening our base, broadening our support can serve to basically build and enhance conservation. That's really what it comes down to. So despite these differences and the challenges we face as a human race, what's interesting, the challenges really remain the same. The players may be different, but poverty, hunger, unemployment, underserved populations with unknown needs, gaps in service. What does this have to do with land trusts? In my mind, the mission of land trusts centers on service. And what's interesting to me is I think land trusts are uniquely positioned to address these challenges. A typical mission might be the protection of lands and waters for future generations. I think Lori made this idea of connecting, and the senator did the same thing, connecting the protection of those lands and waters to values that they provide. Natural resources, recreational opportunities, open space, educational values. As a conservation community, we haven't done a good job in telling our story. Land trusts haven't done a good job in telling that story. That's the missed opportunity. At Rally last year, Rand Wentworth talked about the future of land trusts. He talked about the next 30 years. He said, and this is directly from his speech, the majority of new conservation will be voluntary partnerships with private landowners. Many land trusts will transition from saving land to engaging their communities and connecting people to nature. The local food movement will flourish, and land trusts will be at the heart of making this possible. And lastly, America will come to recognize and value the health benefits of time in nature. What this says to me is land trusts will measure their success beyond X number of acres saved here or there, but how their communities, those local communities, are engaged in conservation and the number of people that are served in the values that these lands provide. I would suggest to you that this is what I'm referring to as this common ground. How do we engage a broader audience? We need to move toward greater community engagement. And food and health, as an example, I think is a commonality. It's something that will resonate with these disengaged communities. They're tied to some very real challenges that will continue into the future. So that's kind of where we are. How do we move forward? How do we engage these communities? I would suggest that there may be 3 pillars or focus areas, didn't know what to call them, 3 areas that we can operationalize this idea. Food and health, I've already mentioned. Education and outreach opportunities, and demonstrating, telling the story of public benefits from private lands. Let me go through each of these. Food and health. Land trusts, I think, could offer alternative opportunities, much like community gardens. We hear about these community gardens in urban areas, urban centers, a way of building community, right? Couldn't we have and I know there are some of these examples, a community farm, a community ranch, a way of building community on some of these protected lands. Growing Power, Katie's Crops are 2 examples of these community gardens. In the first one, it's an example of growing quite a bit of produce in a very small space. The second one is actually same concept but with kids. So engaging our youth, increasing participation. Participation equals conservation. Land trusts, I think, can offer opportunities for private landowners in local organic foods. Small garden collectives, farmers markets. When you look at those ethnic groups, for example, Hispanics and African Americans are more apt to buy and consume local and organic foods. Pretty interesting statistic. That's an opportunity. Natural resource related recreation. Research has shown the value of nature in promoting a healthy lifestyle and relaxation. The point with this pillar focus area is this: these approaches foster community. It's that engagement Mary Pope was talking about, a community tied to the land. With this urbanization of these populations, it's going to be a real challenge, and we need to do a better job of that. Land trusts, education and outreach. Land trusts and other conservation-related efforts are invisible to our kids and their parents. That's where we're at. They don't know what you do. And so they need to understand what you do and the value that what you do is providing them. It's making this connection. Part of it is there's no role models in these agencies or a land trust or what have you. And so being able to change that, I think, can facilitate greater engagement. Land trusts can serve as facilitators to increase that visibility, providing, not in all cases, but access to protected lands to demonstrate the value that they bring to those communities. Initiating alternative, outside-the-box kind of programs is yet another way that we can really start to change in how we approach land conservation and the work that land trusts do. And using these protected lands is, in essence, as an outdoor classroom. Being able to demonstrate the value that they bring. The third and final area is this idea of land conservation. Being able to strike a balance with the traditional approaches of setting aside lands and so forth, but using some of those lands for opportunities to engage, educate, and build community is something I would share with you for you to consider. Focus on engaging new stakeholders via shared interests, this common ground. I think saying, for example, these lands provide local foods, provides health opportunities and so forth, is going to resonate and connect them to the values that those lands provide through protection and conservation. Forming partnerships with related organizations. This is an interesting statistic. Oftentimes we focus our outreach efforts in the high school, early college era. Participation, decisions are made by kids in the 10 to 12-year-old. Research has shown that. So if you want to make a difference, long-term difference, that's actually the window that you need to target. By the time the high school program came around, the kid that participates in X program probably already made a decision that they wanted to go into natural resource or participate in conservation. So doing it a little earlier, I think, is important. And partnering with an organization like the Boy Scouts of America, I think, can introduce them to those values that these lands provide. So, in summary, the three pillars of community engagement, in my mind, could include food and health, building community, education and outreach, tying them to the land, and land conservation as common ground, illustrating those public benefits on private lands. These are opportunities. A couple of more points, and I'll go through these quickly because I understand I'm between the breaks. So, the first is, as you operationalize these ideas, learning and planning. You talked about strategic planning, listening to those communities. What are their needs? And then trying to see how you can focus what you're doing to address those needs makes you more relevant. Board representation. Each land trust typically has a board. What does that look like in terms of representation? So again, there's an opportunity there. Using events to build relationships and connect people more deeply to the land. Protected land visits, hosting events. And one example that I like is the Palmer Land Trust in Colorado, where every year they've got they host an annual science fair with the local elementary. And one of the outcomes or products of that is to actually offer a birding tour to the winners of that science fair. So it's just a way of connecting and offering value to those communities. This is what we are, this is who we are, this is what we do. And again, sort of going beyond working in the shadows. Not to say that you've worked in the shadows, but we need to do a better job in telling our story. Aligning your message with community values and interests. Participation equals conservation. Increasing presentations to community groups, offering tours of protected lands, telling our story is what all of this means. Asking for actions beyond maybe donations, being able to engage kids, for example, in land conservation and what land trusts do, I think can collectively change the level of participation. When I look at this graph, and this is where I'm optimistic, Mary Pope, I see this as missed opportunities. This isn't a dismal picture to me. I see this as an opportunity for us as a land conservation community, as land trusts, to engage these disengaged communities. But it's going to require really a will to change. You need to buy this idea that participation equals conservation. If I can convince you of that, and you think that, I'm in it for conservation, well, then we need to be in it to engage and expand our base. Okay? So having intentional and deliberative engagement strategies, I think, is key to that. I've gone over a few things on how you can engage disengaged communities. I'm going to answer the question, why is diversity important? I look at things from an economic perspective typically. And from an economic perspective, I would suggest that diversity equals dollars. Increasing participation of non-consumptive users, more dollars for conservation. Political support for policies, more votes, more dollars. Participation in environmental organizations, resource conservation, professional societies, consumptive use, collectively getting more people interested in really environmentalism that's become sort of the main discourse that we're seeing. It's an opportunity for us to actually start to move the needle a little further, but we need to tell that story. And you haven't heard this at all, but participation equals conservation. I'll leave you with that. Thank you.